Progress, put simply, is about doing better than the people that came before us. But not only that, it's about being smart in how we choose to do so. But what is the most meaningful way to pursue progress? But more importantly, what is the most meaningful way to define it? There's so many ways in which we can gauge our progress, but interestingly enough, we can measure the progress of our communities and of our countries by the quality of the shared conversations that we have, by delving deeper and taking an authentic and honest look at the things that we're speaking about, the ways that we're speaking about them, the collective conversation. But not only that, by taking a step back and taking a very sincere look at the things that are being said, but also the things that are not. But you see, meaningful progress doesn't just end there. Meaningful progress takes it a step further, and it does the hard work of deepening that shared conversation and motivating its trajectory. But there's a problem here, and it's this. In our shared conversations about progress, there's a huge part of our common vocabulary that's missing. But before I tell you what it is, let's bring this home. Let's talk about something that we all know, particularly here at home, in Africa, and that's culture. As Africans, the roots of custom and convention run deep. But not only that, throughout history, from our champion moments to the times where we've been brought to our knees, the habits of culture have always remained, always. As Africans and in Africa, custom and tradition is so deeply embedded into the fabric of who we are as people. And if there's anyone who knows this, or if there's anyone who understands this, it's me. So I'm only 19. I'm both South African and Zimbabwean. Both of my parents are Zimbabwean. My mother grew up in its capital, Harare, my dad on the outskirts in a small place called Gweru. And as a result, culture's always been a huge part of my life, but not only that, a huge part of my identity as well. But I've always had a very complicated relationship with it, and let me tell you why. Referred to by many different names, there's a common practice that transcends many different cultures. One whereby after a young man proposes to a young woman, it becomes the role and the responsibility of his father and his uncles to offer cattle to the young woman's family in exchange for a hand in marriage. Another practice, traditional circumcision, a rite of passage ceremony, and initiation into manhood. This is a practice whereby young boys are obliged to go into the mountains. And in the mountains, a ritual ceremony of circumcision takes place. But not only that, as part of their process of healing, these young boys are required to stay in the mountains for a prolonged period of time. So you see, these are very common practices, but still to me, they're ridiculously outlandish. Why? There was something I was missing in my understanding here, and that was a hidden conversation. So you see, as much as trading your daughter's hand in marriage for cattle may seem ridiculous, the hidden conversation was this. This is actually a very meaningful practice, one that is designed to help newlyweds. So after the young woman's family receives the cattle, it becomes their responsibility to use that money to endow and bestow the newlyweds with gifts, traditional circumcision. The hidden conversation that I was missing here is that as much as this may seem outdated, the hidden conversation is that the time that these young boys spend in the mountains actually serves as a time where these boys learn about their culture's greatest war heroes and their most triumphant war songs. This serves as a time where these boys are drawn closer to culture, not further from it. And it's so interesting because I'd made both of my value judgments on both of these cultural practices based off the way that things seemed on the surface. Admittedly, never really taking the time to delve deeper and understand what was really going on. I'd allowed my eyes to lure me into the belief that all that I saw was all that there was. But not only that, I'd gone above this, and I'd made decisions based off these judgments. And as ridiculous as this sounds, we do this all the time. So there's a really meaningful message here, and it's this. These hidden conversations exist all around us. They're everywhere. All we have to do is delve deep enough and listen. Intuitively, we understand that often it is the things that we don't see that end up serving as some of the most powerful forces in our lives. Come on, we know this. But you see, our ability to champion progress does not lie in the fact that we bear this understanding, but rather in how we choose to move forward with it. So the big question now, how do we? When a definition no longer serves us, what do? We change it. So I believe that it's time that we start becoming more intelligent and intentional in the ways that we choose to move forward. It's time that we redefine progress. Because in order to really move forward, in order to make meaningful progress, we need to begin to understand what progress was, is, and will be. Because you see, the way that we've defined progress is largely as a result of the conversations that we've been having about it. And up until this point, particularly as humans, we've had a conversation that has made it good enough to define our progress as our ability to deliver tangible results. So I'm here to tell you something different. That's no longer good enough. Aspects of change are inherently complex, multifaceted, and multi-layered. So surely the ways in which we measure that change, our progress need to be too. And in our collective conversation, there's a really important hidden conversation that we haven't been listening to. And one that gives us really interesting and meaningful insight into the things that we value, but also the things that we don't. One that gives us insight into the way that we craft our decisions, but also the most important things that we choose to uphold when we do. And that's a conversation about our ethics, our principles, and our values, our collective values. And if we travel back in time and we go back to history, the proof is there. Rarely do we find any concrete proof or evidence of the way that our ethics have shaped the world around us. So what do we do now? We do better. It's time that we challenge inertia and we redefine and we rethink the way that we think about progress. Because you see, the problem with measuring progress as the way that we have up until this point is that not only is it unintelligent, it's irresponsible. And let's go back to the earliest days of civilization. Let's take a look at Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, some of history's greatest minds, spiritual and intellectual leaders. These people saw ethics as a topic of interest. They saw ethics as a discipline that would cultivate stability at both an individual and social level. So it's time that we take those lessons on board. It's time that we take these lessons on board. Ethics are important, they matter. And every single one of our opinions, every single one of our beliefs, every single one of our values has an ethical component. Our beliefs serve as a very powerful and potent invisible force, one that is deciding and dictating some of the most important decisions that we make. So you see, by beginning to understand this, and then by doing the hard work of crafting our beliefs, we begin to craft our behaviors. And once we begin to craft our behaviors, we begin to fine-tune our leadership. We begin to do better. And the problem with measuring our progress as our ability and by the evolution of the structures that we see around us is that small internal fluctuations and our development on the ground is not taken into consideration. We're inadvertently robbing ourselves of the opportunity to see what happens when human progress and ethical integrity unite. We're not doing our progress justice. So the big question now is, where exactly do we start? How do we even begin to redefine progress? But also, as someone who's younger, where do we all come in? What is the role that young people have to play in all of this? Let me tell you what I think. We start by understanding that we need to undergo a global paradigm shift, not only in the way that we define progress, but in the way that we pursue it as well. And we move forward with the deep understanding and the deep conviction and the deep challenge that often a lot of the problems that we're facing and a lot of the problems that we will face, we're not responsible for. They're not our fault. But it looks like the responsibility has fallen on our shoulders to solve them. So let's adopt that responsibility and let's start doing the work. Aspects of change are complex, we know this. So it's time that we begin moving forward, but we start by finding the area in which you feel as though you are called to make a contribution. And then you step up and you make that contribution. Understanding that, truly revolutionary leaders, the ones that authentically break new ground and mark new territory, are the ones that are not motivated by the interests and personal stories of everybody else. They're motivated and they're inspired by their own. What do we do next? We choose to play our own game. We understand that just because something's always been done a certain way, it doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. It doesn't. Our superpower as young people lies in our ability and our freedom to break new ground and to mark new territory. And it's how we get to define our time for ourselves. Because as we evolve, our evolution will always be accompanied by global power shifts, ones that right now are setting the stage for a new global era. And what comes with a new global era? A new set of rules. So let's make them. But before we do that, we start by asking ourselves this question. What are the things that are so important to us? What are the values and the beliefs and the views and the viewpoints that make us us? Because you see, by understanding these and then becoming clear about what exactly those are, we inspire ourselves to grow. We inspire ourselves to assume a greater identity, to grow while yet still being grounded. It's time that we do the work. Because the problem with measuring our progress only by the external systems and structures around us is that we're not being honest with ourselves. And a huge part of progress, meaningful progress, is honesty. It's honesty. And there's no way we can honestly say that we've moved forward when some of the most important and crucial parts of ourselves are still in the past. There's no way. So this is what we do. We begin to do better. And you see, because once we begin to change and expand that definition, I believe that not only does this make our progress more powerful, I believe that it makes it more meaningful as well. We allow ourselves and we give ourselves the freedom to move forward, as leaders who lead with the clarity of an ethical mind, but not only that, to move forward as leaders who are self-aware. We're giving ourselves the platform and we're giving ourselves the freedom to do better. Because you see, what happens now is once we begin to prioritize progress, we begin to pursue progress. Once we begin to pursue progress, we begin to champion progress. Once we begin to champion progress, we get closer to what we define as progress. And once we're clear about exactly what that definition is, we'll finally know when we've arrived. Our ethics are so important. They matter. So what do we do now? We understand that progress isn't about leaving all the doors open for the people that will come after us. It's about leaving the right doors open. And if there's a lesson in this great life, it's this. Understanding where you're going and then giving yourself the permission to pursue that path is only just the beginning. And as young people, the ball has always been in our court. Not even just that, with all of us, the ball is in our court. And we have to do something that the people before us didn't do, and that's choose to play it right, for goodness sake. So now, what is our responsibility? How do we move forward? Now that we know better, we do better. We understand that there is always a hidden conversation. And in our evolution, not only do we actively search for it, we begin to understand and question if it is in line with where we want to go. So let me end on this. Taking into consideration our ethical integrity, but not only that, choosing to lead with the two, is not only how we honor the people that came before us. More importantly, and more important than anything, it's how we honor ourselves. Thank you.